Hello, everyone. This is MC Deck Discussions, and I'm Abby Small. And today we have a two-deck comparison video. So we're going to compare two different builds of Iceman and Protection. So one of them called the Eternal X-Men, the other the Indomitable Snowman 2026, an updated version of one that I created about a year ago. And the two decks are, I actually couldn't decide. I had two different builds in mind, and I was like, which one should I do? And then I realized, oh, you know what? I'll just do both. And then that way I can talk about both decks and see what I like about each one and which one I prefer. And I do actually have a preference as far as which one was more fun. I really liked both decks, but I thought one was just more fun than the other. And then also give people a chance to go look at each one and go, hey, maybe this inspires of course, you could welcome to use either one of these, but maybe it inspires somebody else's build as well. So some of you that you could use your own preferences, but use these as ideas. So let's go ahead, and I'm going to look at both at the same time at first, just so we can see what's the same and different about them. Then I will focus in on each deck one at a time and talk about those decks and how they played out. All right, and I do have upcoming videos on each of them. So in a couple of days after the release of this video, the Indomitable Snowman 2026 demo gameplay video will come out. And then a couple days after that, the Eternal X-Men demo gameplay video will come out. And so, because I've already recorded those, so those are planned to come out. All right, so let's go ahead and get started on comparing these two. So we can see both of them have plenty of allies, in fact, exactly 13 allies, but they are made up of there are some slight differences in them. You'll see a lot of the same ones, but let's go ahead and differentiate the decks right away. So the Eternal X-Men is meant to be a deck that builds out and actually keeps some of the minions out as kind of Voltrons for the rest of the game. So when we get later on to that, you'll see we have protective training to facilitate that in that deck. In fact, let's go there first to the upgrades, because I think that'll be a better place to differentiate the two decks. And then we'll come back up and see why certain choices were made with regard to the allies. So if we look at these upgrades, we have 3 copies of protective training. And again, this is in the Eternal X-Men. And that's why it's called the Eternal X-Men, because I'm expecting to have 1 or 2 allies who stay out, most, if not all of the game. So that title is about the X-Men themselves, the allies. And then, so we have 3 copies of protective training, right? You attach that to an X-Men ally, max 1 per ally, and the attached ally gets plus 3 hit points. So they can let them stay out significantly longer. And both decks, you will see, have 3 copies of Ready for a Fight in them. Iceman wants to go down to Alter Ego in order to, well, first of all, it's just nice for the bigger hand size, but also going down to Alter Ego lets him use his Alter Ego ability. So let's just review that real quickly. We might as well just look at both sides, but let's start with the Alter Ego ability. Scroll up a little. So on the Alter Ego side, he has a Recover of 4 and hit points of 11, hand size of 6. And he begins the game with the 6 Frostbite upgrades set aside. And for those who need a reminder, what the Frostbite upgrades do is they give -1 attack and -1 thwart to whatever enemy it is attached to. And then after that enemy activates, it gets discarded and it's available for us to use again. And he's able to use that when he attacks or defends against an enemy. Then it gets put on as an interrupt. In fact, I guess we'll say that right here. So if you look at his hero side, the freeze ability, interrupt when Iceman makes a basic attack or defense against an enemy, attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to that enemy. So we got that done. But looking at the rest of the Alter Ego side, he has the Cool Off ability and this response. After you change to this form, shuffle 1 ice card from your discard pile into your deck for each copy of Frostbite in play. So that's a really important one. He has some great cards that we do want to put back into play. So Ready for a Fight is important in both of these decks. So those really important cards to put back in, like he has all kinds of good cards, but one of them in particular that is a great choice is Frozen Solid, because that one can just completely cancel whatever the villain is doing, whether they're going to attack or whether they're going to scheme. And then it also then puts a set-aside copy of Frostbite on that enemy, so it inhibits them in their future as well. So that's a great card choice. But, he has some attacks and thwarts that one might choose as well, right? But those are the ones that tend to be focused on. And I used it especially in this other deck, actually, in the Indomitable Snowman 2026. All right, so let's continue with the rest of the upgrades. So those are the ones that are the same, ready for a fight. But then we also have 2 copies of Energy Shield in the Eternal X-Men in order to also give a chance to keep allies in play longer. So when the attached character would take any amount of damage, spend X energy resources, you can prevent X of that damage. And that's also partly why we want to make sure to have the X-Jet in this particular deck. But also this deck, so to differentiate them, this is meant to be a build-out type of deck, so it's slower to get going. And this is meant to be more of a tempo deck. So, getting out there and attacking regularly with everything that you can, not necessarily clearing the minions right away all the time, not necessarily getting rid of those side schemes. Whereas the Eternal X-Men, we're trying to build out with it. So we are, since we're trying to build out with that deck, we are trying to take care of all those things pretty much all the time so that we can, have that ability to build out. And it looks like maybe I'm not going to separate these to talk about them, each one. Well, there will be a time when I will do that. Okay, so there's the differences. There's those upgrades here. And then the other different upgrades actually, let's talk about the sports too, because that's kind of go hand in hand. So we also have Cerebro, Team Building Exercise, the X-Jet, and Utopia. Both decks have Utopia. Both decks have 1 copy of Team Building Exercise. But again, with that build-out idea of the Eternal X-Men, right? The Eternal X-Men, then this deck has the X-Jet in there as well. And then Cerebro being able to be utilized as an extra, basically resource generator when we go to Alter Ego. So with 13 allies in here, it rarely misses. I don't know if I missed a single time, actually. And if you happen to have, usually it wouldn't be Professor X, but if you happen to have, who are they? It's not Rogue. Who are the ones that are, the White Queen. Here we go, White Queen. So is a psionic ally. And then I think there's one more psionic ally. There it is, Legion. And Legion is a psionic ally. So if either of those are in play, then you get to actually choose from your entire ally pool when you're using Cerebro in order to get a card. So for those who maybe haven't used it in a while, it's an Alter Ego action. Exhaust Cerebro, search the top 5 cards of your deck for an X-Men ally, and add that ally to your hand. And then, as I mentioned, with a psionic, though, you get to search your entire deck instead. All right, so notice, more supports here, more of that build out, but also Cerebro becomes pretty important because of that whole idea of getting protective training, but also it filters out your deck. So you take out some of those X-Men and allows you to have more of your own cards in the deck. So, and that's important because, one of the most important cards in Iceman's deck is Cryokinetic Perception, right? So it has that hero response. After you resolve your freeze ability, exhaust this card, and you get to draw a card. And then if that card has an ice trait, Ready Iceman. So even though this deck has 42 cards and the other one has 41, this one would have, has that potential to actually have a higher percentage of times when you are drawing those Iceman cards. Although, interestingly enough, this deck was more readily available to go down to Alter Ego side. And when you go to Alter Ego side, you have that potential to go ahead and put more Iceman cards in your deck. So both decks just did a good job of pulling those Iceman cards and readying Iceman again. But the really key part of the deck of this card is the drawing a card, but it's nice to have little subtle ways to maybe increase your chances of getting those ice cards instead. All right. And then again, looking at the Eternal X-Men on the left, so we looked at all of that, right? So more of the build out. And then over on the right now, if we, let's go ahead and check out those supports first. So we have Angel's Eerie, Notice it's a one cost upgrade, one cost support, and we don't have the X-Jet. We're not worried about that. And a way to make up for that is in the upgrades, we have deft focus in this one. So exhaust deft focus, reduce the resource cost of the next superpower card you play this turn by 1. And we have quite a few superpower cards in this deck. So first of all, the events, right? So we have the 2 attack events are superpower cards, the 3 thwarting events are superpower cards, and both of Ice Blast are superpower cards. So that's already 5, 6, 7 cards that are superpower. And then we also have cryokinetic perception. So deft focus can help get cryokinetic perception, which costs 2. So then it'll just cost 1 when we use deft focus. And then I think there's one more. Yes, and then Ice Slide is also a superpower card. I also found that in this deck, I prioritize getting Power Belt out into play more often. And so that could also help generate a wild resource for your ice cards. So that I found that to be an interesting distinction. I often didn't bother getting Power Belt out in this deck, but in this deck, I tended to get it out pretty frequently and utilize its resources. But overall, this deck, it was easier to just kind of get things out naturally as the game flowed, whereas this one I would purposefully really try to get, these big supports out and get them to help get the deck set up. Whereas over here, I wasn't worried about getting the deck set up so much. As soon as I got one of these out here, or maybe I could get this team building exercise, get Utopia out, get Deft Focus out, possibly get Power Belt out. If I got one out and it wasn't convenient to get another out, then I didn't really care. I did care about cryokinetic perception no matter what, but I didn't care so much over here. And because we were really taking the battle directly to the villain's face in the Indomitable Snowman deck. All right. So now that we've distinguished between the supports, and I do want to mention Angel's Eyrie. So Angel's Eyrie is a fantastic card when you're going to defend. So this card, is not meant to be that you're defending as much with Iceman. You will defend with him for sure, but you're not going to defend as much. And you're going to do more do more defending with the allies, except for the ones that you want out more permanently. So having 13 allies is still great because you only have 1 or 2 that you might want to have out the whole game. And then, or maybe, you could get to 3, right? Because we do have Utopia in both decks. And for those who want to see that again, haven't seen that in a while, if each of your allies has the X-Men trait, increase your ally limit by 1, right? So the real purpose of this is the response. After an X-Men ally enters play, exhaust Utopia, ready an X-Men character. But I did find that I benefited at times, especially in this deck, because I would keep the allies out so much. If each of the increase in the ally limit by 1, then we could have quite a few allies out and then just keep trading in other allies in order to defend for Iceman. Because like I said, I wouldn't defend with Iceman nearly as much over here. In this deck, Iceman is meant to attack. So which is great because that also gave a bit of tempo to these decks as well. So because since he was attacking minions and especially the villain all the time, then that meant he was putting his frostbites on them and reducing their ability to attack. And so he could, we didn't have to use what that allowed for actually is for those minions that I wanted to keep out there permanently to stay out there permanently. So it meant they could do so more often. So it still worked out really well for that. Okay. And then over here, as I was starting to say about Angel's Eyrie, okay, so after you defend against an attack, place 1 fatigue counter here. And it has an alter ego action. Remove each fatigue counter from here. Heal 1 damage from your identity for each fatigue counter removed this way. So in this deck, you are meant to be defending pretty much every turn, at least especially once you get cryokinetic perception in play. And possibly, if you have Unflappable out in play. So in this deck, since you're defending so much, you are able to utilize Angel's Eyrie regularly when you go down to your alter ego side. And once you're there, you don't necessarily have to use Iceman's recovery. You can just utilize this. So you defend a few times, get over to your alter ego side, and heal up for 3. So I would maybe once a game use his Iceman's recovery in the Indomitable Snowman deck. but I didn't have to utilize it very often once Angel's Eerie was in play. And then, as I mentioned before, Team Building Exercise and Utopia are also in here, right? Again, Team Building Exercise only costs 2, so it's relatively easy to get out. And we mentioned Depth Focus. Because we are defending regularly, Electrostatic Armor turned out to be a great add. I actually had it in the deck for a while, and I really liked its effectiveness, but I had gotten rid of some cards and added some cards, and I was at 41 cards, so I removed it because I just liked all the other cards better. But I decided at the end to just keep the 41 cards, so I still played with it in the last games as well. So, and the reason it's so effective is not only, if you get it out early, you can do quite a bit of damage overall, but it was really nice for getting rid of those tough statuses on whether it was a villain or a minion, but especially on those villains. And so be able to just deal with that and not have to waste one of the attacks on getting rid of that tough status. Now, because Iceman readies regularly, both because of the possibility with Cryokinetic Perception, but especially because of Utopia and the numerous allies in both of these decks, it was pretty easy to get rid of tough statuses, but it's just nicer not to have to do so. And then this one has 3 copies of Indomitable, so that makes it really nice when you are defending. So if you have a Cryokinetic Perception in, so notice it's a hero response, so it's a response. And then Indomitable is also a response. So after your hero defends, discard Indomitable and ready your hero. Again, this is just a 1-cost card. So you can have 1 or more of these out in play as a little insurance. So you use Cryokinetic Perception, you draw a card. If that card has an ice trait, you ready Iceman. If he doesn't ready, you go ahead and discard Indomitable and you ready anyway. So it was really nice having that backup for when Cryokinetic Perception didn't trigger that part of its ability. And then we already mentioned Ready for a Fight, and then Unflappable. So you might think, so notice I didn't do anything to bump up his defense, and we played against some challenging villains, including Magneto. But generally speaking, Unflappable would trigger pretty much almost every single time because you're constantly putting on, those frostbites, right? And in this deck, you put them on more regularly because you'll do it when you're attacking, because you do it when you have, you're attacking, you have Utopia, you ready up, right? So you attack and you put you go ahead and put a frostbite on them. But when you defend, you put a frostbite on right away. So then you decrease the attack again. And then plus, as I mentioned, I was regularly getting Cryokinetic, not that one, where'd it go? Frozen Solid back into my deck to utilize again and again. So in those cases, that's not going to help out Unflappable, but what it does do is after Frozen Solid is done, it puts another frostbite on, and then you get another frostbite on the villain when you use Chill Out, right? And you can possibly do that too in your attacks, and periodically I would choose to do that. And then Ice Blast also puts them on. So you can really have the villain accumulate those regularly and be able to very easily draw a card both from Cryokinetic Perception and Unflappable. So it was really cool to have that kind of efficiency where I didn't have to build out the deck to have lots of defense. I could be getting cards out naturally as I played and just be able to trigger those things as I went. Okay? All right. So let's go ahead and get into the individual decks now. All right, so we'll start with the Eternal X-Men, and I do want to note I had this build restriction for both decks. I wanted to utilize only X-Men allies, and then I didn't, this was just something that I wanted, is just no offensive readying type events like, say, What Doesn't Kill Me or Repurpose. So I could have had maybe some of the defensive ones, even though I just chose not to include them. I decided overall that having just way more allies and constantly triggering Utopia all the time is the way that I really wanted to ready most of the time, along with when Cryokinetic Perception would trigger. All right. So with the Eternal X-Men, it was really fun getting to build these out. So the 2 primary targets I had for protective training were Rock Slide and Rogue. And especially Rogue, but Rock Slide was awesome too. So both of those were like, whichever one would come up, I was really hoping to get them into play. Overall, there are more expensive allies in this one. Oh, that's where I forgot to finish differentiating is on the allies. So actually, I'll just do that as we're talking about each individual deck. So this one, both decks have Rogue in it, so they both have this 4-cost ally. But this one also had Rock Slide and some other maybe 3-cost allies that aren't included in the other one. So like White Queen, for example. And so White Queen is in this deck and not in the other one. So they're a bit more expensive because we are building out and because we have more resource generators overall, or true resource generator with the X-Jet. We're able to get out those more expensive allies. And so including the White Queen and Rock Slide as two kind of more expensive allies really worked out well. Okay. Another potential one to use protective training on as a primary target was Gambit, if Gambit came out with at least 2 hit points, right? He has this response. After Gambit enters play, look at the top 3 cards of the encounter deck and tuck one under him so that only the boost field is visible. And then above that, right, X is the number, he gets X thwart and X attack, and X is the number of boost icons on the card under Gambit. So if he has at least 2, then he has the ability to do 2 thwart and 2 attack, and so he's valuable there. And if he has 3, he's just a fantastic target, being able to do 3 attack or 3 thwart the entire game, which there was at least one game where that occurred. So all of those are really good targets. Legion once in a while was a good target. Sometimes he was just healing himself so much that I didn't need him to be a target for it, but he can be a great target to keep out in the game all the time as well, just constantly triggering the extra 2 damage to an enemy and removing 2 threat from a scheme. So there were times when he was a target. Once in a while, I had backup targets with Polaris and the White Queen, since the White Queen could constantly do 2 thwart and Polaris could constantly do 2 attack, right? But overall, Rock Slide and Rogue were the primary target. So let's look at Rock Slide first. So he's a 4-cost, as I mentioned before, and he has 3 attack with 2 consequential damage and then 1 thwart, and then he has Retaliate. I didn't care about the Retaliate. I didn't use that a single time, I don't think, in any of the games I played. But the 2 attack, I think I played like 7 or 8 games overall with both of these decks. But the 2 attack, the 2 consequential and the 3 attack, but with 3 health means that just naturally you could attack with him 3 times. You could get away with a thwart once, and you can still attack for 3 times before using him up. And that was one of the big things about this deck. Was my goal was I didn't want to defend with these guys. I wanted to use up every bit of their power. I wanted and have them be defeated from, in this case for Rock Slide, using up his attack and getting that 3 damage each time. So if he can attack for 3 times, he can get out there as a 4-cost ally and do 9 damage. However, if you attach protective training, that adds 3 more hit points, giving him 9. So if he did do just attacks the whole time, right, he already has 3 attacks getting him up to 6 damage, a 4th attack getting him up to 8 damage on him, and that leaves 1 more attack. So he could get 5 attacks for 3 each, 15 damage altogether. If I happen to get an energy shield on him, then possibly, you could possibly get more out of him, but overall I wasn't usually wanting to use energy shield on him, okay? Though it could prove beneficial. Okay? And then Rogue ended up being really cool, and I'll go down and show you one game in particular where I got Rogue out like maybe the first or second round, and I'll share with you what Rogue ended up doing. So as a reminder, what Rogue does, first of all, it has 2 attack and 2 thwart, is a 4 cost, 3 health, and an action, deal 1 damage to another friendly character until the end of the round. Rogue gains each of that character's traits and adds that character's printed thwart and attack to her matching powers. So what that means is, at a minimum, I could utilize X-Men, right? Iceman. Iceman has 1 thwart and 2 attack. And so at a minimum, utilizing Iceman, that means Rogue could have 4 attack or 2 thwart. Okay? So with 3 health alone, right, that means, some combination of those, right? So you could do quite a bit of thwarting and attacking. But if you end up getting protective training on there, then there's some more. And then one time I did get energy shield on there as well to extend her life even further in that game that I was talking about. So looking down here, so let me go ahead and find that part where I talk about where I have my notes on what Rogue was able to do in that one game. Okay, so scrolling down to the conclusion is where I have my notes on that, right? So right here, Rogue alone thwarted in that game for 12 and dealt 22 points of damage, right? So looking at it all together, right, that's 34 points of combination of thwarting and damage, but either of those individually are fantastic. so it was just an amazing game with that. Like I wouldn't have necessarily guessed that would be possible to get that combination out there, but if you use what is that card, Energy Shield, multiple times, I didn't end up getting Energy Shield out on her until near the end, but I was able to extend that out. So it was just really cool to do that much damage in one game from Rogue alone. So if you're looking for an Iceman deck that's not leadership, that has this kind of Voltron build out that can be really effective, then the Eternal X-Men is a good one to maybe look at as some inspiration for your build. And I did have, like I said, I had a time too when Gambit was out there with his 3 attack and 3 thwart doing his thing too. So highly effective there. All right, so that's the gist of the Eternal X-Men. Overall, great results. Normally ending the game with, somewhere between final attack of 18 to 20 points of damage in that final round. But the other thing about this deck was you could find that time, like once you got built out with some of these bigger ones, what you find is you could do decent big chunks of damage time and time again. So you get that going and you'd go, oh, this round I did 15 points of damage. The next round I did 14 points of damage. And then the game's over. So and that if you had a villain that had more hit points than that, you could do it a third time in a row, right? You could end up, once you had things built out, you could just do relatively large damage, not these huge bursts of damage, but relatively large damage time and time again. All right, so let's go now and look at the other deck. Again, this is your build out deck, kind of a slower, slower build out to develop, but not forever, because again, you're attacking with Iceman to the villain's face, so you are dealing damage throughout the game. So once you do get, built out, then the game tends to get to be over pretty quickly here. All right, now let's head over to the other deck. Okay, so for the Indomitable Snowman 2026, so like I said before, this deck is meant to be more on defense. And I have to say, if I'm looking at fun, like both decks I thought were fun, and I just think Iceman is fun if you build out a deck that's really good and you're utilizing Utopia regularly. I think high ally counts, doesn't have to be 13 allies, but high ally counts, utilizing Utopia just makes Iceman more fun. But I did find it more fun utilizing his ability on defense more, which I didn't expect. Because, when you use him on defense and you get a Frostbite on them, right, Frostbite gets taken off right away, so it doesn't stay on there as long. But I just found that utilizing him on defense, triggering both Unflappable and Cryokinetic Perception, readying because of Cryokinetic Perception and Indomitable, which meant I could then attack. Now, when I was on my attack side, I wouldn't get to use Cryokinetic Perception again because it got used up, on my turn. But I did get to still utilize Iceman's attack on his turn, so he'd get to attack for one, very often at least 2 times each time, with having Utopia out and constantly getting allies out. And that rhythm of this combination of utilizing him defensively and offensively, yet because I didn't have defensive events in here, he was just adding to his deck every time I defended. When I had Cryokinetic Perception in, he would be automatically adding. So now you have, for sure, 6 cards in your hand because I wasn't utilizing events that would then use resources. So he'd end up with 6 cards in his hand with that. And once I had an Unflappable in, he would often end up with 7 cards in his hand once it came to the offensive side. So he could very easily attack, get in an ally, and then utilize his Arctic attack or Chill Out or Ice Blast on top of that, because they had that nice hand size. So this deck, that flow of being able to consistently use him on defense and then have fun also playing on offense is what really made this such a fun deck. I had forgotten how fun this deck was. So the old version was a 4-pack version that I had built for the Masked Hero, which I do have, I think, a link in here somewhere to his channel. A lot of you are probably familiar with him already. So I had built about a year ago, right before I started my channel, I had built him a deck, the Indomitable Snowman, but it was a 4-pack challenge one. So it only utilized 4 packs altogether. And as you can see, this one utilizes 11 packs. So it's been upgraded since the original one. And I decided, I'll just call it 2026 to differentiate them. But that deck, I had forgotten how fun it was. It just wasn't a super competitive deck against expert villains. It was great against standard villains and some expert villains, but once you got to the tougher villains, it couldn't really compete. But this deck can, right? Like I said, it handled Magneto, and it did handle Magneto and the other villains as well. So I did forget to talk about the villains that I played against in the other deck. So let's go ahead and talk about those real quickly. So I went up against Claw, all of these in standard and expert, went up against Claw. And I mentioned in a previous video, what villain do I actually often feel like between Magneto and Claw? Which one do I often feel like I'm going to lose against? It's actually Expert Magneto because of my Expert House rule that guarantees that at the beginning of the game, I have one of those high hit point minions out right at the beginning of the game, guaranteed. And so that did in fact happen. I lost once. And I was glad I lost because I refined the deck. So let's talk about those refinements real quickly. So originally I did have Rock Slide in this, and I mentioned earlier that that this deck was that I wanted this deck to be cheaper. I didn't know I wanted it to be cheaper originally. So having it be being cheaper and having it be that this deck is going to be a more tempo deck, meant to defeat the villain more quickly by just constantly attacking the villain, attacking them with your allies, not worrying about getting rid of all the minions all the time, not worrying about getting rid of all of the side schemes all the time, utilizing the attacks whenever you can, right? All of those things really made this, first of all, I mentioned it, I thought it was just a really fun deck to do, but what that meant was once I realized that this was a more tempo deck, Rock Slide needed to be pulled out. It just wasn't working. And so that loss is what made me realize that. And so the additions that I then had afterward was I put in Armor and Professor X, and I had originally taken Electrostatic Armor out and then I put it back in. So that's just a note about putting it back in. But Professor X, being able to go down to Alter Ego, this deck was awesome going down to Alter Ego because I kept getting neutralizing that villain, which meant I could start off with a hand size of 6 again when I was in Alter Ego side and be able to utilize Angel's Eerie to heal me up and then get some more of those frozen solids and some more of the Arctic attacks back and take it to the villain. So I recommend both decks, of course, depends on what kind of build you're looking for. But I just found this more exciting. And if you haven't really tried Iceman in a while on a defensive build, and especially a build like this where you can utilize him really fully on both his offensive, when it's your turn and also when it's the villain's turn, I recommend trying either this deck or something like it and see how it goes, right? And there's other inspiration too out there. I noticed Charr from the Charred Gambit that he produced an Indomitable Snowman. His is called the Indomitable Iceman. I called mine the Indomitable Snowman because I love the sound that the Indomitable sounds like abominable. So I'm just thinking of Iceman as the Snowman, right? So it's the Indomitable Snowman. Plus we have some snow clones in here too. So that's what I called it. And then you also have from the winning hand, Boomguy, right? So he also has an Indomitable Snowman deck. So, and I think if you look at their decks, they're more likely to appeal to those who are multiplayer players, since I'm a solo player. So mine might be more appealing there, but you still might like what they have against certain villains. Their decks might be truly more effective against those other villains and just more fun depending upon what you're looking for. So I recommend checking out their decks as well. I don't have them linked. If I remember to, I'll link them. I'll link their decks or at least their channels in my description here. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed this. Again, let me show the two decks side by side real quickly. Or actually, I'll just show each one real quickly. Right, so we have the Indomitable Snowman 2026, and the other one was called the Eternal X-Men, right? So the Eternal X-Men. So there they are. Please like and subscribe if you appreciate this kind of content. And I love having chats with people in the comment section too. And apparently that can make a channel grow faster. I don't know how that all works, but I'd certainly appreciate having my channel grow as well. All right, have a great one, everybody.